you can imagine this, we were a benign North Korea. Everything was controlled by the government, and I mean everything.
You had to have a permit to go on a holiday and get the money for travel.
I remember my father bought a car and he had to put his name on a waiting list for like 6 months, and then you had to go into a lottery. It was dreadful.
There used to be a 6 to 9 month waiting list to get a telephone put on, and this is in a house that had all the infrastructure in place.
We're a dairy producing country, so if you wanted to eat margarine, you needed a doctor's letter of support.
It was crazy, like a pair of working boots manufactured in New Zealand were probably 3 or 4 times the price of a pair of boots in the United States. It meant everything that we had here was expensive, or way more expensive than what could have been.
In 1960, New Zealand was the 3rd most prosperous country in the world. 20 years later, it had fallen to 18th. No one was untouched by the decline. New Zealand's parliamentary government had evolved into a controlled system that dictated everything, from salaries to the manufacture of staplers.
9:30 p.m. Saturday the 14th of July 1984, a moment of political history.
Muldoon and the National Party lose in a landslide, and the Labour Party takes control. David Lange becomes Prime Minister, and within days, a new Finance Minister is appointed. He is Roger Douglas.
Well, I think that New Zealand has tremendous potential. It has to be remembered that in 1956 we were the richest country in the world. We've slipped down.
One of the big things that we did was to take immediate responsibility. There was no point dwelling on what Muldoon hadn't done over 9 years. When you were elected, it's your responsibility. You own it.
New Zealand's finances were in worse shape than anybody thought.
And when we met with the Reserve Bank and the Treasury, they explained that the country had run out of overseas funds. We'd run out of people to borrow money from, and the next loan was due in 2 weeks, and we couldn't pay it.
Douglas had a tough love vision for New Zealand's future.
We took interest rate controls off, we got the wage controls off. So we did a whole lot of things immediately. We took away a lot of support for manufacturers. We opened up import licensing. We took away or removed privilege. We just got rid of government handouts to special interest groups.
Roger Douglas was very concerned about low-income New Zealanders. He was, in that sense, quite traditionally left-wing, but he'd come to the recognition that the normal policy measures one associates with the left-wing simply were not working.
Many of the first reforms affected the farmers directly. Within 6 months, all farming subsidies ended. The federated farmers supported this, but only if trade restrictions were simultaneously removed. This way, the cost of farm equipment would drop, and farmers would have access to world markets.
New Zealand got rid of the whole raft of that sort of thing. Farmers had better access to imports like tractors and other goods that they had a harder time getting before.
And it was interesting because it taught me a lesson that if you package the reforms as we did, that becomes the key to acceptance. Because whilst the farmers might have been unhappy to lose all their subsidies, they gained by the fact that they could import from anywhere in the world cheaper.
By 1990, Roger Douglas and the Labour Party had shaped the economic landscape here for 6 years. Changes had been difficult, and the Labour Party had fallen out of favour. After the 1990 election, the National Party came back into power.
Another no-nonsense finance minister is appointed. She is Ruth Richardson.
It's like a passing of the baton in a relay. I was able to do a sprint that he wasn't able to with the reforms.
So in some sense, it was a 1-2 punch. In both cases, reforms moving in the direction of greater openness, greater transparency, greater government accountability, and better incentives for the private sector.
So take our agricultural sector and take the meat industry and the slaughterhouse. So you had a closed shop, and I say this as a feminist as much as a finance minister. You had a closed shop, the boys had all the good jobs, they stopped the women doing the jobs that really paid well. You had to belong to the union, and the union said who worked where and for what wages. There were 25,000 people working in the railways. 25,000 people only needed to be 5,000 people. So when you disrupt 20,000 people who are in pretend work, how are they going to re-enter the workforce if you've got all these closed shop arrangements?
All those things was a form of privilege that helped a few people who were employed in that industry, but cost every other New Zealander, including the low income, a lot of money.
And in 1994, the job growth exploded. People were free to work.
New Zealand, I think, got the combination right. They reformed the private sector and they reformed the public sector basically at the same time.
New Zealand also started applying private sector accounting disciplines and transparency to the public sector. This is not the case in the vast majority of countries around the world. In fact, if private businesses were to report their financial books according to the same standards as government accounting, it would be deemed illegal in most countries. In New Zealand, government officials could no longer get away with a lower standard.
If you took a static snapshot the day after the reform, yes, there would be people displaced, of course, if you just froze it in time. But the world's not frozen in time. There's a dynamic. What does it unleash by way of the human spirit, the opportunity, the new economic confidence?
The Douglas and Richardson years resulted in a massive reorganization of the government. Civil service reforms streamlined productivity. Many industries were taken out of government hands and reorganized as for-profit companies, including the railway, airline, telecom, and banking.
It's about getting rid of privileges. It's about empowering the normal people. It's about sweeping away all of the special favors for the powerful.